what's challenging, particularly in the work I now do, is as soon as you say where you went to school, the myth of privilege comes up. Wow, weren't you so lucky? Wow, that must have been amazing. And
Right.
for me, privilege is, true privilege is being raised in a loving home and in a community. But that wasn't my experience.
Welcome to Rethinking Education. Education's critical friend.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Rethinking Education podcast, Education's critical friend. Before we dive into today's conversation, I want to tell you about two really exciting things that are happening. First, it's a really exciting time for oracy in education. 60 years after the word was invented, the importance of developing spoken language and listening skills is finally receiving the recognition it deserves. The recent curriculum and assessment review has signalled an absolute step change in terms of oracy. They're setting up a national oracy framework and embedding an explicit focus on spoken language across the curriculum, which is just amazing. We've been punching the air and doing cartwheels over at Oracy Cambridge, and this has not come about by chance. This is the result of decades of sustained work by researchers and educators all over the world and throughout this country. The history, though, of oracy education is littered with well-intended initiatives which faded through poor implementation or through poor politics or whatever. We've been here before. This time, if oracy is to become a permanent feature of every child's education, we must ensure that the implementation is just as strong as the rationale for doing this in the first place. And that is why at Oracy Cambridge, we've created this program, a 6-part program for teachers, leaders, and oracy leads called Implementing Oracy. It's a combination of 3 different sets of ideas, really. The research and evidence, which we're really strong on at Oracy Cambridge, the practical ideas for how to implement oracy in the classroom, and Topsy Page will be leading on that, who's just written 2 books. She wrote 100 ideas for the primary classroom and 100 ideas for the secondary classroom around oracy, which she co-authored with Alan Howe. That one's coming out early next year. This will be based at Hughes Hall at the University of Cambridge, 6 sessions across 6 months from January to July 2026. 4 of those sessions are at the uni, and then 2 of the sessions will be remote sort of check-ins. And we've got a real focus on 3 key areas: inclusion, assessment, and impact. The 3 things that schools tell us that they want to get right most frequently. The early bird deadline is this Friday, the 21st of November, which gives you a whacking great reduction on the full price. But if you hear this episode after that deadline has passed, then just drop me a line anyway, and I'll see what we can do. If there is still availability on the program, which is not guaranteed, but if there is, then we'll see what we can do. We have some amazing speakers lined up, including none other than Neil Mercer, who literally wrote the book on oracy. I've got it right there. If you haven't read that, then I strongly recommend you do. The Transformative Power of Finding Your Voice. There's a link in the show notes with all the details and booking information. So that's Implementing Oracy. Starts in January. You can book up until for as long as we've got places available. But that early bird deadline is this Friday, the 21st of November. Next, the Making Change stick. Oh my goodness. Right. So this time last year, the book Making Change stick had gone off to the publishers, and I was working like the clappers trying to get this online professional learning suite, all of these resources available for people for when the book launched in January. And then January came along, and that deadline just simply whooshed by at pace, and I was not even remotely close to meeting that deadline. And that is because it's a little known fact that making an online course is the hardest thing. In my humble experience, it's the hardest thing that it's possible for a person to do. It is, I don't want to labor this point too greatly, but it has been absolutely brutal getting this thing over the line. And so January came and went. And then what happened was that I was invited to take part in this insanely exciting project with the Welsh government around learner effectiveness, which pretty much eclipsed everything for this year, including my ability to finish that course. And so I now have the situation where schools have been writing to me saying, when is this going to be available? We're ready to go. I have schools that have paid me their hard-earned money, taxpayers' money, to create this thing that has not been created yet, to provide something that has not yet been created. And so I promised those schools I will get the phase 1 stuff ready by October half term, which was 2 weeks ago, and I hit that deadline. And the rest of the stuff will be available by January 2026. And so to hold my feet even more firmly to the fire, and in response to an article that I read that said it's a really good idea to offer people a whacking great discount on Black Friday. So we've put together this deal where you can access the whole program as and when it's available. So the first third of it is available to go right now. And then the rest of it will be ready in January 2026, as I say. And so between now and Black Friday, which is Friday the 28th of November, you can get a 30% reduction off a 3-year whole school license. That gives you full access to this program for everybody at your school. And there's 30 different chapters with a facilitator guide, facilitator slides. There's a playbook, there are videos, there's exercises, quizzes. This is why it's been such a killer to make this thing, but I am really proud of it. And the reason that I've made this is because there is only one of me, right? And there are 5 million schools on this planet, and every one of them needs to learn about implementation and improvement science. And you will not get this information anywhere else other than my book. And books are great, but they're not really great learning devices. It's just a static thing that you read in a linear way. And this is much more interactive. And this program is designed for teams in schools to work their way through applying these ideas to a real world change initiative. And if you implement this full program and it does not bring about lasting improvements in terms of pupil outcomes at your school, we will refund your subscription in full. That's how confident I am that these ideas, when implemented correctly, when implemented faithfully, if you go through the program and implement these ideas, you can't go wrong. Seriously, you can't go wrong. So again, there's a link in the show notes with all the information. And that's it. That's all of the selling stuff. So let's dive into today's episode. This one is a bit different. I've gone rogue. As you can see, my usual co-pilot, the real David Cameron, is absent today. And that's because this is just a one-off conversation, a crossover conversation with Chris Braitch, where we interview one another. Chris, if you have not come across his work before, is the founding director of an organization called Seen and Heard, a really interesting not-for-profit which supports the well-being of people who have been through the private school system, many of whom have experienced institutional neglect, emotional harm, or abuse. Chris himself was sent to boarding school at age 7. And in this conversation, he talks really openly about what that was like, and crucially, what Chris calls the myth of privilege, the idea that being sent away to these elite institutions is somehow a privileged position. He says, that's really not what privilege should be defined as. Because as soon as you mention boarding school or private school, people sort of assume that you've had an easy ride. But that's not often the case. Chris's story and the thousands of stories of the people who he now supports tells a very different story. And so Chris tells this very personal tale about how after 20 years working in sales and marketing, this all came to a head and he had a bit of a breakdown, or as he beautifully reframes it, a breakthrough. And through lots of coaching, through men's groups, through some deep emotional work, Chris discovered a new sense of purpose, and he now works as an emotional health coach and a leadership coach, and he's doing incredible work trying to change the system, both from the inside and from the outside, I suppose. So we talk about things like trauma and hypervigilance and strategic survival personalities. It's quite a heavy episode. We also talk about why the education system continues to locate the problem in the child rather than recognizing that perhaps the system could do with changing a little bit. We also talk about my stuff a bit. We talk about the learner effectiveness program that I just mentioned that I've been developing with the Welsh government. We talk about all that stuff about slice teams, implementation science, why top-down reforms so often fail. We talk about oracy, spoken language, AI, you name it, it's in here. It's a very, very full, wide-ranging conversation. It is a deeply human conversation, at times a challenging conversation, but ultimately I feel a hopeful one, as well as honest and heartfelt. I found it very moving in places, and I hope that you do too. So let's get into it. I'll hand over now to my fascinating recent conversation with Chris Braitch. Hope you enjoy the show.
Let's rethink education.
Welcome everybody to the Seen and Heard podcast, the conversational series. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. James Mannion, and we'll be doing things a little bit differently today. So we're going to be sharing this podcast space and taking around half of the time to speak to Dr. James Mannion and speak about his work. And then he'll be taking control of the microphone and speaking to me about the work that we do at Seen and Heard. So first, though, I'd like to introduce Dr. James Mannion. He's an educator, researcher and change maker who's rethinking what education can be. James is the founder of the Rethinking Education podcast and movement, which brings together educators, parents and young people who are passionate about transforming our school systems for the better. He's the co-author of Fear is the Mind Killer and Making Change Stick, a practical guide to creating lasting change in education. James also leads the Learner Effectiveness Programme in partnership with the Welsh Government, and he's a key voice in the oracy movement through his work with Oracy Cambridge. Whether it's supporting schools to embed evidence-informed practice, championing student voices, or shaping national education policy through the Education Policy Alliance, James is helping to build a more human-centred, equitable approach to learning. I'm really excited to dive into all of this with him today. So welcome, James, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, Chris. And yes, I'm very intrigued to see how this plays out. I've never really come across a podcast where like people just like interview each other and switch halfway. It seems like a very sensible thing to do, but we'll see how that plays out. So should I introduce you for the benefit of our listeners?
Sounds great, thank you.
Marvelous. So Chris Braitch is a father of 3. He is also a partner to a wonderful girlfriend, as well as a surfer, a musician. We should talk about music at some point. A coach and a founding director of the not-for-profit Seen and Heard, an organization which supports the emotional well-being of ex-pupils of boarding and independent day schools and their families. A topic that's come up a few times on my podcast, but I'm really interested to hear more about that. Chris has found his calling now supporting others, utilizing his diverse life experiences and professional skills learned over a 20-year career in sales, marketing and management at some of the world's largest food companies. And he's come to understand that where your greatest wound lays is where you can find your gold and your gift to the world. That's super interesting. I want to hear more about that. His difficult life experiences and ongoing journey with challenging mental and physical health are now opening new doors and conversations in his personal and professional life, and he feels ready now to step into his purpose that he feels he's been training his whole life for. So yes, I'm on the edge of my seat, or I would be if I wasn't at a stand-up desk. I'm on the edge. I'm on tiptoes, let's say. Yeah, let's dive in, shall we?
Yeah, that sounds great, James. Thank you for the introduction. And one thing I love to do when I'm speaking to anyone is to get a little bit of a flavour about kind of where they came from and how their life has been to bring them to the work they're now doing. So if you could just give me a bit of a taste of how life was for you when you were growing up and kind of what shaped the experiences, a few of the experiences perhaps that shaped kind of how you feel so passionately about education and the work you're doing now.
Interesting. I've asked this question to so many people over the years. I always do this like educational biography thing, and no one's ever asked me for my one. So thank you for that. So I'm from up north. I'm from Lancashire originally, and I went to like Catholic state schools. So they were quite weird. in their Catholic way. My sixth form college was populated by lots of nuns who sort of seemed to hover around in dark corridors, which was often a bit spooky. It was sort of pleasant enough. Like, it wasn't horrendous. There was a bit of bullying and stuff at school, but like nothing crazy. I remember just feeling quite disengaged from it. I didn't really relate to what I was being taught, or I didn't really develop any particular passions. I just wanted to get out of Bury was my main aim. And so I went traveling when I was 18 to Australia and Southeast Asia, and then lots of the people that I'd sort of already booked my place at uni, and so I kind of came back and went to uni. But lots of the people who I'd met when I was traveling were either from Brighton or had moved to Brighton. And so I just wanted to be in Brighton at the first opportunity. So I finished uni, did a biology and psychology degree, and moved to Brighton at the first opportunity. And then all I wanted to do was just write poems and write songs. And so and obviously I had to earn a crust, but I wanted to do jobs that didn't occupy my mental capacities at all. So I didn't want to work in an office. I didn't want to have to think about other people's things. So I did basically like manual labor type stuff. For most of my 20s, I was like a gardener, greenkeeper on golf courses, builder's laborer and stuff. Did lots of that, and then had a really weird sort of twist where I'd just been fired from being a builder's laborer. I wasn't a particularly good one. And then I got offered a job at Harvard Medical School, which was quite weird, because when I was at uni, my brother, who's older than me, was working in a lab at UCL, and the guy who ran that lab had since relocated to Harvard. And so I might be the only person in the world, I suspect I am the only one, who's gone from being a fired builder to working in a like really cutting edge neuroscience lab at Harvard Medical School. And they offered me a PhD, but I didn't actually fancy it. I'd seen quite a lot of people go through that process of becoming a scientist, and they didn't look particularly happy. There's lots of issues with that line of work, and the science itself, I wasn't really into it particularly. And so I came back and sort of had a bit of an early life crisis, cycled to Morocco by myself, and then figured out that I wanted to be a teacher really quite quickly. It didn't take long to think about it, and came back and signed up to become a teacher. And I always sort of wanted to, actually from the outset, to change the education system. I could see that it was not ideal from the outset, that it wasn't setting people up for success. And if anything, it was compounding their problems and making them feel bad about themselves. Not in every case, but in many cases. And I still basically hold to that analysis. And so right from the outset, I was sort of interested in doing research and trying to investigate this and agitate for change. And so I taught for like 10 years, 12 years, and then did a PhD and a master's, and now I work as a freelance educator and teacher trainer and general sort of adjutant, writing blogs and organizing conferences. And I run this think tank called the Education Policy Alliance, and we try to shift the dial on what's happening, which is actually a really, really hard thing to do. I'm discovering, but you know, we're making inroads in various ways.
Thank you so much, James, for giving us kind of a whistle-stop tour through the early years and shaping you, and then that exploration to get on the bike and find your calling to education. So yeah, your work now that you're doing, particularly with the Rethinking Education podcast, is how I came to know your work. And I was also speaking to Jo Symes at Progressive Education.
Oh yeah.
Who's wonderful and has given us great guidance at Seen and Heard. So she said, look, you know, see if you can get a conversation with James, because he's going in the right direction. He's one of the good guys. So thank you. How did Rethinking Education come around, the podcast itself?
It's a while ago now, probably 5 years or maybe 5.5 years, I think, since it started. So it's not that easy to remember. I think that like part of it was that I was just encountering all these amazing people in my work as a education advisor, And I sort of just thought, like, some of them were just like unsung heroes, and I really wanted to be able to shine a spotlight on some of those people. And also I wanted to sort of to try to prise open the Overton window a little bit. It feels to me like, 2012, 2013 was when I sort of started really getting into blogging and reading about what was going on. And Twitter was, like edgy Twitter was just sort of starting to take off. Something that's now died I'm actually very, very grateful to Elon Musk for killing my addiction to Twitter. Just stone dead. I've got half my life back. But all this amazing sort of, blogging and sharing of good practice and so on was happening. But it felt to me like it was a bit narrow. It was literally just that. It was like sharing of good practice. It was like, oh, here's a resource for how to start a lesson or whatever. And some of these wider questions that people were writing about a lot in the 60s and 70s with books like, like The Failing School and The Underachieving School and Deschooling Society and what have you. People were asking big questions about schooling and what this is doing to people, both positive and negative. And it seems to me that some of those questions haven't actually been laid to rest. I think that we need to ask some quite searching questions about what we're doing. And so I wanted to try to sort of to broaden the conversation around education, and to start entertaining possibilities about, other ideas that we could maybe explore together.
Well, thank you. And it's a fantastic podcast for anyone that hasn't come across it. Do go search it up on YouTube, other platforms. But hearing from you, a lot of it was just to sort of bring out these unsung heroes, to sort of hear from, to sort of shine a light on some of these great conversations you were having. What were the kind of themes, the frustrations, the stuff that was coming out from those conversations that you really wanted to capture around, rethinking education?
I think it's funny. It's often parents and carers who come to me with like long emails of like describing some very harrowing tale of like the difficulties that either they faced or that their children are facing, or both. And they often talk about like they use the language of like feeling embattled and that they're having to fight for their child. And often it's just kids that just don't fit in the mainstream. And that's a swelling number, right? We've got over 2 million persistent absentees from school out of only 9 million kids, so over 20%. And, there are so many sort of interconnected issues around that. So like, why are they not attending? There's issues to do with mental health and well-being, of course, and technology addiction and what have you. But also, curriculum comes up a lot. Like when we did a piece of work recently around well-being with where we had about 160 parents, mainly parents, responding to this survey. And we were just asking about mental health and well-being, and we didn't really ask questions about curriculum. But curriculum came through really loud and clear in the responses. And they were like, what is this arcane like thing, this set of ideas that you're sort of force feeding our kids, and they don't get any choice over what they learn about, and they're not able to pursue their own interests. And there's so much that's really, we might consider with our teacher hat on to be perfectly valid, really interesting areas for exploration that are just not up for discussion in schools, and so, that comes up a lot. The forgotten third as well, this idea that 1/3 of kids essentially leave school branded a failure by the exam system is just quite a deep structural issue, which is not okay at all, is it? Like we need to think we don't need to fail 1/3 of kids in order for the successes of other kids to mean something. So that comes up a lot. And then the other thing that comes through a lot is just all of the amazing things that are already happening within the system. Like there's no shortage of brilliant practitioners working within the constraints of the existing system, whether that's in the state system or independent or elsewhere, who are doing wonderful things, And so there's lots of upsides to these conversations as well.
Well, thank you, James. Yeah, really, really powerful work. I think one of the most important things I heard there was just how many good people and how many good things are happening out there in the system. But it's the system, if you like, the institutionalized system part of it that is often tying their hands or suppressing that creativity or that drive to listen to their hearts and sort of, for the teachers to really follow what young people need and want. And likewise for the teachers to feel like they're working in a supportive environment. It seems to be the institutional structure I hear a lot that's holding that in. Could you speak to that around what you've come up against, particularly with the Education Policy Alliance or your other work, trying to change the minds of the policymakers?
Yeah. So yes, absolutely. We often sort of like there's this phrase that people often use that we locate the problem in the child, right? So if a child is behaving in a challenging way, if they're not attending school, if they're not succeeding in whatever way, it's often like, well, there's something wrong with the child, and so we need to diagnose them and label them and perhaps put them on some medication and do some sort of intervention. We use the language of interventions all the time, don't we, in education, which is what you do to a drug addict. It's as though there's something that's a problem in the child and we need to intervene in their development and sort of patch them together. And it's all done with the best of intentions, right? Like the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and people are really, really working hard to do everything that they can with limited time and resources to improve outcomes for kids. I think that links to the accountability system as well. Like we have this very sort of high stakes approach to accountability on whichever way you look at that, whether it's Ofsted, whether it's teachers being performance managed and in some cases having performance related pay, obviously exams and testing and what have you. And it's all done again with the best of intentions, and we want to have metrics that we can improve to show that things are getting better and what have you. But all of that translates into just like additional pressure to perform on everybody, on head teachers, on senior leaders, on classroom teachers, on parents, to enforce the line and to get their kids into school and doing their homework and stuff. And of course on young people. And it's just having all of these adverse effects that we were talking about earlier, So, and then your second part of your question, you were asking about like sort of working with in policy to try to shift the dial on this stuff. Mm. And there's this one piece of work that I've been doing recently with the Welsh government around learner effectiveness. And this is really about just like broadening the scope of what we consider to be relevant, like educational activity, I suppose. And so like we've developed this model of learner effectiveness that's got these 6 domains. So we talk about physical well-being. Is the young person looking after themselves physically? Are they getting enough sleep? Often that's not the case. Are they eating a healthy diet? Often, they're sculling a litre can of Monster on their way into school rather than having something like porridge. Do they understand how to use their bodies, as a tool for self-regulation, as a tool for overriding your nervous system, and, wiggle your toes, bring yourself down into your body as a way to override your nervous system. Breath work is hugely powerful. So there's lots going on in physical, and we have like emotional literacy, emotional well-being. The habitual domain, like habit formation, building up like healthy habits, and also dialing down less healthy habits, helping kids to learn how to deal with this crazy technology, for example, that we're all wrestling with. Relational learning, how you relate to yourself. Like, so many people carry around like negative self-talk. They beat themselves up all the time, and they're like, you're stupid, you're ugly, you're unpopular, no one likes you, you'll never be good at maths or whatever it might be. And often people really believe that, but actually it's just a bit of script, isn't it? It's like just an unhelpful bit of script. Somebody probably once said something to you, or you had a bad experience, and you just absorbed it, and you were like, yes, that is me. I'm rubbish. And you carry that forward. But when people come to realize that is just a piece of script, and actually perhaps they can overwrite it, they can hack their brains and write some new piece of code and maybe step into some different story and make that their story. And some people might think that sounds a bit therapeutic, but I think that's absolutely the role of educators, to help people to become more fully themselves, more at ease with themselves, to develop more self-awareness, self-belief, and to develop themselves in these other areas as well as cognitively. So they were the first four domains: physical, emotional, habitual, relational. The fifth one being cognitive. And then if you picture those they're like five wedges of a circle. And then around the outside, we have the sixth domain, which is like a ship's wheel, the navigational level, which is like, where are you now in relation to any of that stuff? Where do you want to be, and how might you get from A to B? And the idea is that the child is standing at the helm of that ship, steering themselves towards, the kind of person that they want to become. And this has been, so we've developed all these resources around this model. We've got 72 strategies, 12 in each of those 6 domains. Practical strategies, each of them takes about 15 or 20 minutes to teach. And we've got a load of other supporting resources, and there's a professional learning program for teachers and leaders and support staff. And to their credit, the Welsh Government have really gone for this, and we're rolling this out. I'm doing the 5th in a series of 6 implementation webinars this afternoon. And then from September, this is rolling out across the country. And it's initially aimed at 14 to 16, although some schools are already dropping it down to year 7, say. But I think the next thing is to think about transitions and figuring out right the way down to early years through to from 3 to 19. We want to have a shared language of human development, that includes cognitive stuff, but also includes this broader idea of helping people become more fully themselves, as it were.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing about that. So that's the Learning Effectiveness Programme with the Welsh Government. And along my I'm not from an education background, as you read out in the bio, but on my journey to learn more about the sector and bring in some of my business stuff and the mental health work that I do, I've been drawn as well to very progressive practices in Scotland. And had a big change in policy a number of years ago now, which has helped lead Scotland in a more trauma-informed, child-centred way. So it feels to me, is England a little bit stuck in the past? Is it wedded to something, or is it waking up a bit now?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I did a podcast recently called The Four Nations, and we had people from each of the four, and I was representing England, as it were. So you sort of there's so many different levels on which you can analyze what's happening educationally. And so absolutely, in terms of trauma-informed practice, I think Scotland is leading the way. But also, it's quite widely acknowledged, I think, that there's a big review going on at the moment of the curriculum for excellence, as they called it in Scotland, which turned out to not particularly be that excellent, in terms of literacy and numeracy and so on. And I think that there's some concern in Wales because the Welsh model is quite closely linked to the Scottish model. Some of the authors of those two approaches were the same. But I think that one thing that sets the Welsh model apart is this focus on learner effectiveness, is this focus on broader personal development. And so I'm very excited to see how this plays out in Wales in the coming years. In terms of England, I mean, there are lots of people that I'm in touch with, school leaders and teachers, who are leading the way on this stuff, who are doing things that are really forward thinking in terms of play-based learning, being extended right the way up through primary schools that are getting rid of desks and chairs and sitting in rows, and they've got the kids, sitting on beanbags and cushions and actually working really well, and because they can regulate themselves physically, their behaviors massively improved because of that. And there are loads of examples of schools doing really forward thinking stuff, and so I wouldn't want to to paint with a broad brush and to say English schools are behind the curve, because I don't think that that's true. But I think perhaps in terms of national policy, there's been this since 2010, since the coalition government came in and the Gove reforms, there was this big move away from anything that looked a bit skillsy. So, there was a fantastic qualification that we ran at my school for a while called TARS, Thinking and Reasoning Skills. It was absolutely brilliant, a level 2 OCR course, and it was about teaching kids how arguments work, how you can, what like is an assumption, what's an intermediate conclusion and a final conclusion, how can you analyze arguments to tell whether they're faulty or not, logical fallacies, and using conspiracy theories to help people to develop their ability to think and reason and draw on evidence and stuff. And it was such a really, really good qualification. And it was just binned, because it was it wasn't about knowledge. It actually was about knowledge, but it wasn't like a body of subject knowledge in the traditional sense. It was seen as something. It had the word skills in the title, and so it went on the bonfire along with hundreds of other qualifications and practices. And lots of the work that I am involved in around learner effectiveness has just completely withered on the vine in England, and it's thriving in other countries. And internationally, I do lots of work internationally, and yeah, so England. I am happy to paint with a broad brush in terms of national policy. This knowledge-rich stuff, I think that there's been some really interesting gains there. I think that we had lost sight of knowledge. There was that famous the book by Michael Young, Bringing Knowledge Back In. I think that had to happen. I think that things went a bit woolly and a bit sort of nebulous for a while there in some of the New Labour policies in the sort of early 2000s. But I think we've made that point now. We've got our house much more in order with regard to a knowledge-rich curriculum and sequencing, knowledge and what have you. This other stuff is really important, and all of these issues that we're seeing. There was a recent study that found that children in England are twice as likely to say they dislike school now as they were 8 years ago. Plus the absentee crisis, plus behavior, plus mental health and well-being, teacher recruitment and retention, you name it, misogyny and sexual abuse. There is no shortage of very, very serious, deep-rooted and widespread problems because of the way that the system is currently configured. But systems can be reconfigured, right? And so, that's what we need to do.
Thank you so much. And is that very much linking into your work with the Education Policy Alliance, the EPA? And what are policy makers and campaigners, what do they need to do to really connect with students, with frontline workers, and start to make things move in the right direction?
Yeah, so yes, it really does link with the Education Policy Alliance. And so the other big piece of work that I've done in recent years is around implementation science and improvement science. And I published a book earlier this year called Making Change Stick, as you mentioned earlier. And that started 10 years ago when I just stumbled upon this conference that was about implementation science, and it absolutely blew me away. And I could see that this was absolutely what we need, because so many improvement initiatives are launched and so few of them actually improve anything. And everybody knows this, and that's true in schools, it's true in politics, it's true in business, in healthcare. It's very, very common that we implement these change initiatives that don't actually improve things. And I think that one of the major reasons for that is that we default to top-down change. We just have this pyramidal structure of this assumption. It's like people very rarely even question it. The sort of the myth of the heroic leader who's going to sort of save us all from ourselves. And so we have senior teams in schools, NHS directors and clinical leads in healthcare, of course, like cabinet ministers and what have you in politics. And sometimes top-down change is good, and it's helpful to have a small number of people with their hands on the levers of power, but it shouldn't be the only approach. And so one thing that I borrowed from the health literature and work that I've been doing recently in schools is using slice teams, where you take a cross-section through the organization and you get representatives of people at different strata, if you like, for different levels of that little ecosystem. So in schools, we might have kids, parents, governors, midday supervisors on a team looking at behavior, as well as, middle leaders, senior leaders, head teachers, early career teachers, as well as experienced teachers, and so on. And it's not just a consultation exercise. You get those people sitting around a table for a period of time, looking at what the problem is and how to implement, and then evaluate that change and sort of tweak it over time. And it's really effective. And that's sort of the DNA of the Education Policy Alliance. So we are a very diverse group of all of those people that I just mentioned: classroom teachers, school leaders, policy people, ed psychs, what have you, people like me. And that kind of inclusive decision making is really powerful. Because you just make better decisions because you've sort of looked at it through all of these different perspectives. And also when you're doing this within an organization, you really get buy-in from people, because this is not just like the usual being told what to do by somebody with a clipboard. And that sort of just goes against human nature, doesn't it? People don't like being told what to do. And so people really come with you because they can see that they are being respected and listened to and represented in the decision-making process. And so it's a very smart way of going forward. And so in answer to your question, what can people do? Get into slices, just like organized slices. People are really up for it. There's a bit more to it than just getting into a slice. I suppose this is the bit where I plug the book, or you could probably find like stuff on my blog that explains how slice teams work. I've got a couple of Substacks, one called Rethinking Education and one called Making Change Stick, where I talk about the slice team stuff more. And can I just share one example? Actually, I interviewed, there's a head teacher called Kulvan Atwal, who's a head teacher of 2 schools in Essex. And he was giving a really rich example recently of this, a slice team in his school. So they're a rights respecting school, and they had a slice involving a kid of year 3. And she spoke up, and she was like, the problem with this is that, like, when a supply teacher comes to our school, and that happens quite often, they don't know that we're a rights respecting school, and so they don't speak to us in the way that other teachers do. And so we need to educate those people. And so she was like, let's make a leaflet, and we'll just inform people. So when they come to the school, just say, okay, here's what you need to know about a rights respecting school. And the children have rights here. You know, they get to have their voice heard. And so, and it's a beautiful example of, somebody aged 5 or 6 making a really sensible, practical suggestion for how we can, improve things at the school. And so that kind of inclusive decision making is super powerful.
Thank you so much. It's the first time when we were chatting before this that I'd heard of the term slice teams, but from my corporate life, that's all we did. So every time you were bringing a product to market, or you were put together a cross-functional team,
right,
from different parts of the organization, for the exact reason is you need someone from the factory floor to tell you, look, that's all lovely in marketing speak or manager, sort of corpo boardroom nonsense, but that's not actually going to work on the floor. It won't stack up, and this is why. So I think it's great that it's really cutting through now to education and to different environments.
Yeah,
and then it's very moving to hear of a young person having their rights respected for a start, and then actually feeling that they could speak up and being included.
Absolutely. It's funny that, like, it's often in business, like, because businesses can't afford to not make smart decisions, right? And so, like, lots of these ideas that are in that Making Change Stick book are widely used in business, but just not so much in the public sector, it seems. So yeah, like comms planning, like how much of a bread and butter issue is comms planning? And like in almost every school that I go into, and I sort of say, like, do you have a comms plan? And they go, what's a comms plan? You're like, how are you organizing, like running a school of like 2,000 people without a plan about what you're gonna communicate and how and through which channels and so on? Like, it's just mad that we're not doing that. And I was on an education podcast recently, and this came up, and they were like, oh, that sounds a bit corporate. You're like, right, well, corporations make run well, don't they? Because if they don't, then they go out of business. And so maybe it's okay to be a bit corporate if it means becoming like less dysfunctional.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's so many learnings from sort of from both sides, both business and state systems. Something that's a part of the conversation for me that we touched on was this kind of divide, particularly in the UK, around private and state education. Nick, can you see a convergence of those at any point towards a more sort of human-centered approach, or are they just kind of you're either in one camp or the other?
Yeah, you do see. Yeah, so there are partnerships, right? There are lots of examples of schools in the independent sector working closely with their colleagues in state. I'm really interested in working with both. And so these resources that I mentioned earlier that we developed with the Welsh government, we're currently putting together an international steering group of people from all sectors, primary, secondary, independent, state, special schools, PRUs, whatever. alternative provisions, to think about how we can apply these ideas in different settings. And I mean, I'm keen to do more of that kind of work. Like there is a very deeply divided system. There was an interesting piece. I think Melissa Ben might have written a piece in The Guardian around, or it could have been Fiona Miller. It was one of them, around about the time of Brexit, and they were talking about this divided country has its roots in a divided education system, and it's hard to shake that, isn't it? Like some of the schools that I've worked with have been in the independent sector, and some of them look like castles, right? So like I worked for a while with Dulwich College, for example. Nigel Farage famously went, and it looks like something out of it looks like a stately home or something. It's like a magnificent looking building, and it's really close to like Brixton. So there's some areas of London that have got some really quite deep levels of deprivation, and you sort of turn the corner from driving down some street where you perhaps wouldn't want to be after dark, to like all of a sudden it just opens out and there's all these big trees and you just this leafy, and if you were a kid in the back of your parents' 4x4 or whatever, like going to school and you're like looking at all of this stuff and people queuing up at a bus stop, something that you've never had to do, and then you go to school in this stately home. It's you can see how that child is going to grow up just thinking like, I'm not like them. We are not the same. Like this is like, I live in this rarefied world. And you can see those very, very deep levels of division are sown by that state versus private sector. And I think in an ideal system, you wouldn't have that, right? Like you wouldn't have that division. It's difficult to see how we would get there from where we are. Because it's just a complicated issue, isn't it? And for a while, it was recently like Labour under Corbyn, Labour were talking about abolishing private schools, weren't they? But I don't think that that's probably going to happen. But yeah, to the extent that we can make things more equitable, so much the better.
Yeah, thank you. And as you know, a big part of our work at Seen and Heard is to try and bring some of these practices you're talking about in Wales, we talked about in Scotland, trauma-informed schools, or emotion coaching, or any incredible sort of progressive stuff you've referenced, try and bring that more and more into the independent sector, particularly boarding schools. And there are many who are doing a great job being quite progressive. There are still many that are the stately home that are wedded to tradition. And, wellbeing something for the prospectus, really, rather than anything else. But, thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. And we have it with healthcare in this country, and we have it with education. And largely, of course, the people that go into government and the judiciary and the press are from the private school sector, particularly boarding schools, massively over-indexed in those areas. So possibly the hierarchy that I was certainly fed with at boarding school shows up in our country. Yes,
it does indeed. And that feels like a neat segue into talking about your work. And so shall we switch at this point?
Yeah, that was good. I think the only thing that I was desperate to know a little bit about was Oracy Cambridge.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's not something that's familiar to me. So could you just, you're involved in the Oracy Cambridge movement. Can you just tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So my PhD was supervised by a guy called Professor Neil Mercer, who's quite well known in the education world. And his work has been around this word oracy, which was invented in the 60s by a British researcher called Andrew Wilkinson. And Wilkinson wanted to essentially like give spoken language equal parity to written literacy and numeracy, hence inventing the word oracy, like literacy, numeracy, oracy. And for various reasons, it's sort of come in and out of fashion a bit in education over the last sort of 5 or 6 decades, as things tend to do. And at the moment, we're very hopeful. Like the Labour government prior to election, Starmer gave a speech where he said, we're going to have this big focus on oracy. And Bridget Phillipson's mentioned it a few times. Spoken language and communication is going to be taken much more seriously in schools. And now there's a curriculum and assessment review going through at the moment. And in their interim report that they published earlier this year, oracy was not mentioned at all. So that was a little bit puzzling and quite concerning. And people who are in the know seem to be saying, don't worry, behind the scenes, things are happening. And in the final report, it will be reflected. And we are still going in this direction. But we're all a bit on tenterhooks. And so so following my PhD, I was asked by Neil to join this group, this sort of a think tank study centre called Oracy Cambridge. There's about 10 or 12 of us on the management committee there. And we write papers and we run conferences. We did a brilliant conference last week with another charity called Voice 21. We deliver lots of training and consultancy. I'm doing this really interesting project with the National Gallery at the moment, a 5-year project, training up their gallery educators in methods and techniques of how to teach through spoken language. And it's a very powerful, important lever, I think, that we have in terms of going back to the equity thing. Like one of the big things that people often talk about, the difference between state schools and private schools, is just how confident kids from private schools seem, how that sort of effortless, sort of like self-belief and verbal fluency, and it's just no surprise when you look at what happens in those schools where, those, like a quote from a previous head teacher of Eton, and it's like boys are expected to speak in every lesson, and they have debates, the balloon debates and whatever the other debates. They recently built a new debating chamber at Eton called Jafar Hall, and it's cost about £20 million, just this one room, and it looks just like the House of Commons. It's just like rows of benches facing each other, this adversarial debating chamber. And they're literally role-playing for when they get to run the country, which is a good idea. We should practice these things. But every kid in the country, every kid on the planet should be playing that game. Like, we're not drawing from the widest talent pool, shall we say. And a cursory glance at the House of Commons will tell you that. And so... Yeah, just as a final word on that, it really reminds me of a previous podcast guest who I mentioned to you earlier, John Higgs, who just said, 2 minutes of looking at what goes on in the average day in the House of Commons tells you that there's something very seriously wrong with our private education system. It's an astute observation, I think.
Yeah, thank you. And the psychotherapist and author Nick Duffel, who writes quite extensively about boarding school syndrome and related topics, his book Wounded Leaders is a brilliant dive into what occurred for those people who are now in the corridors of power of military, clergy, politics, education, etc. And what levels of experience and dissociation they will have gone through. In their early years, to be able to then go out and kind of run a country for which they cannot possibly understand 99% of the people that are in that country.
Yes,
which is quite something. And of course, it plays out on a global stage as part of the old empire, etc. But
yeah, well, now we really are segueing into your bit. So let's switch over now, and I will assume the microphone. I will wield it more obviously. So like the same question applies to you that you asked me earlier. Just as sort of like a brief introduction into you and your life path and into the work that you do now, if you will.
Yeah, thanks, James. Yeah, thank you. For me, the early year stuff was bumpy, was difficult. My mum had mental health issues, very bad postnatal depression. She didn't actually want children in the first place, and as a result, she was sort of in and out of my life really in the first 5 years with her own mental health problems. Dad very much did his best, but he had a business that he was an engineer by trade. Mum was a teacher, so we're kind of a lower middle class family, I suppose you call it. But Dad's business was taking off. He as an engineer, he got into computers at the right time in the late 70s, and he was very much focused on that. So I was kind of bounced around caregivers. and with mum in and out, it was difficult. And when they finally divorced when I was 5, it was a case of, there was only really one thing in the divorce settlement, which was Chris goes to boarding school, and my dad had to pay for it. So that kind of led into a segue. My mum had gone on to meet my stepdad, who was an ex-boarding school guy. He went 8 to 18 and was a product of the system. Everything you spoke about, incredibly good orator, public speaker, author, very smooth. And I think my mum was grew up in a pub in Blackburn, and thought, I'll have some of that for my son, please, because that looks like a good model, and she knew she couldn't look after me in a healthy way at home. So I went to boarding school at 7, and my first school was bleak, was cold, was hungry, was the corporal punishment was still very much alive and well in the late 80s. The private sector hung on to it for another 10 years after it was banned in the state sector.
Really? Oh gosh, I didn't realise that.
Yeah, they clung on to it. So spare the rod and spare the child. Was it spare the rod and
save the child? Is it? Spoil. Yeah, that's it. Sorry,
that's
it's
it.
not
So
save.
it was very much of that ilk, and there were good things about it. The sports, as you said, the facilities, the rolling fields. Mine wasn't a top flight one by any stretch. It was mainly military kids, the children of missionaries, people who were stationed overseas doing sort of state business, if you like. And that's what a lot of people forget. There is Eton, there is the elite boarding school stuff, but boarding and independent schools are such a wide sector. State boarding, you've got the kind of progressive independent schools who are doing stuff with special educational needs, or you've got the so-called naughty boy schools of the 70s. The kind of places where people will just put away. So it's a really broad sector, but mine was kind of middle of the road. But I experienced, the classically called boarding school syndrome, which is ABCD: abandonment, bereavement, captivity, dissociation. So effectively, the child cannot understand, even if the child knows is going away to a boarding school, cannot fully comprehend what that's going to mean. And so there is an abandonment from all that they know at home. The bereavement, the sadness at losing home, losing family, but not being able to express that in the boarding school environment. Crying isn't welcome. There's no one to speak to. There certainly wasn't back then. Captivity is, okay, well, this is it now for me. I'm stuck. I can't get away. I'm gonna have to survive. And you build a strategic survival personality in order to do that, which you'll see played out very well in the corridors of power. And then D is dissociation, finally, which is at the point at which the child's psyche is overwhelmed. The child has to check out, and we see that very much show up. So I followed that model and boarded until I was 13, before I came home. And sadly, Mum, who'd been ill for a very long time, she died a year after I came home from boarding school, of a brain tumour. And by that point, my card was marked as far as drink, drugs, heavily dissociated, panic attacks, and a real struggle sort of through teens. So, it was a really difficult start to life. And what's challenging, particularly in the work I now do, is as soon as you say where you went to school, the myth of privilege comes up. Wow, weren't you so lucky? Wow, that must have been amazing. And
right,
for me, privilege is, true privilege is being raised in a loving home and in a community. But that wasn't my experience.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that, man. That sounds rough in all kinds of ways. I'm interested in, while you were experiencing this at school, was it ever sort of mentioned? Did you talk with the other? Was it all boys?
No, I went to a mixed school, but I think we only had maybe 4 or 5 girls in my first school, and then in my second school there was probably 30 or 40, and a very difficult experience for the girls as well, being in that environment.
Yeah. Perhaps we'll come on to that later on, because some of the recent stuff around the issues that were raised by adolescents and like issues around misogyny and the everyone's invited thing. There was some independent schools that didn't come out of that too well. But was it ever mentioned? Did you ever sort of talk to your peers at school and sort of say like, this is rough, or this is not, or was it just a bit sort of, were you just trying to survive and sort of not really address what was happening? Do you remember any conversations of that nature?
No, thank you, James. Good question. I mean, I don't remember a lot. I mean, typical sort of dissociative memory loss from my first 13 years, really. I've got a very, very patchy, so I don't remember conversations. But I do know for a fact, which is once you're in an institution like that, it has its own language, its own code. It's like a cult, effectively. You're indoctrinated into this being the way things are, and you don't know any other you don't know any different. So if you're being beaten for your own good to show you what's right and wrong, or if if the school week is 80, 90 hours long and runs all the way through the weekend and 2 chapels on a Sunday and just think that's how it is. This is how my life is now. And everyone else seems to be rubbing along all right. And very importantly, this is something that did a real number on me, is if you were to complain, is the don't you know how lucky you are. This is a great privilege, a great honour. And that creates a real double bind, which is if someone's come through a state care home, they're unlikely to be told how extremely lucky they are. More like there could be prejudice around those who found foster parents, those who've managed to stay with parents, those, they may be seen as the lucky ones. But if you're in a group home, you're unlikely to be called incredibly lucky. Whereas if you're in a residential boarding school or residential school, you may well get do you know how hard I've worked? Do you know how much we sacrificed for this? So I think for me, between that from home and in the school, this is the way we do things. No, we never spoke about anything that I can remember. You just survived.
Right. And to what extent would you say that the problems that you experienced were related to the fact that it was boarding, and to what extent do you think that it was about just being in an institution of that nature and the myth of privilege that you were just describing?
Yeah, thanks. That's something we look at a lot, because it's seen and heard. We support wellbeing of past and present pupils, but boarding and independent day schools. So people who've been through private day schools share a lot of the challenges that boarders did. And the biggest one, you touched on it earlier, is just timetabling and overwhelm and exhaustion. Burnout is the biggest problem in the private sector of education, both for teachers and pupils. It is now, and it was then. The school day is ridiculously long. So both because I've been a day pupil and a boarder, I can see it from both sides. And that was very much a commonality, as was the sort of strange language, the punishments. It was all pretty much the same. Boarding double down on top of that is the not being able to go home, is the captivity element, there's nowhere private in a boarding school. And a lot of the boarding schools, they didn't have toilet doors. You bathed in public, if you like, with everyone else lined up, with a matron scrubbing your back in a kind of an inch of muddy water. And then the toilets didn't have doors on them. So you couldn't go and cry in a toilet. You couldn't get away. So That's very much changed now. They go, oh, we've got carpets now and we've got nice curtains and the food's great. I agree with that. But ultimately, if you can't get away and you've got no one safe to talk to, or even just to talk to, and you've got nowhere to be private, the complex post-traumatic stress, if you like, the inability to get out and get away and roll the stone back across and let your nervous system settle down, which we know is incredibly important, it wasn't there. So to the letter, I've never met anyone who hasn't come out hypervigilant, because you had to be on it all the time, whether it's work, safety, or academics, sport, etc. There was no turning off.
Right. And can you just expand on that hypervigilance thing? How does that show up?
Yeah, how does it show up? I mean, I can speak to because my experience with it, and then there's my coaching work and the seen and heard stuff. But ultimately, it's going to open up the path to addiction, because if you are hypervigilant all the time, your nervous system gets wrecked, and in order to disengage from that and sort of quiet the hungry ghost inside, as Dr. Gabor Mate talks about, you're going to seek things. It could be behavioral, like control. It could be sex. It could be exercise, workaholism. It could be substances, booze, drugs, etc. So that tends to be, we as a population, if you like, massively over-index on those coming out into adulthood, ways of coping, and the hypervigilance, illness. So a lot of stress-related illnesses, autoimmune conditions, particularly, early heart attacks, early cancer, etc. That's how they're going to show up. But behaviourally, in the world every day, that very strategic approach to life. So you see it in our politicians. Everything is debate. Everything is cut and thrust. Everything is defend and parry and counter-attack. There's no heart-centeredness. There's no collaboration. I mean, God, you don't need that. It's not required. So, and they're constantly being on. There is almost no way to quieten the thinking mind. And most people with hypervigilance are effectively floating heads. There's no connection to the body, to the earth around them, to community. It's just a sort of very strategic mind operating attack and defense through life.
I see. Thank you for that. That's a very rich and vivid account. And so let's pick up your story. So you said that your card was marked when you left school, and your mother died shortly afterwards, and you had like trauma, essentially, like unresolved trauma that was going to play out. You were hypervigilant. You mentioned like drinking drugs and things. I just wonder, before I want to get to the work that you're doing now with Seen and Heard, but could you just sort of chart the next bit of your journey as to where that went and how this work came to take shape?
Yeah, thanks, James. Yeah, I mean, for me, the first time I ever felt I had a home was at university. So I got to uni somehow. I screwed up my A-levels because I was drunk the whole time, and I was having panic attacks by that point quite regularly. So I got to uni, but there I found a family of sorts, a home I could live in. I love the guys that I live with. And it was a good time for me. I was a mess. It's when I first got into counselling. I went to the uni counselling services and said, I'm falling apart. I'm having a breakdown. Mainly alcohol, gambling, all sorts of other stuff. But I got through uni, just about, and went out. Didn't know what I wanted to do. I still remember the careers advice at school gave me 4 options, really, which was sort of military, clergy, educator, politics, or so. You've only got a few routes you're allowed to go from these kind of schools. So I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I ended up, now looking back, having done a lot of personal healing work and therapy, I basically tried to do what my dad did. And ultimately, I tried to make my dad proud. So I went into business because he was a businessman by this point, and went through, read in the bio, 20 years of sales, marketing, some of the world's biggest sort of corporations, working my way up, full of ex-boarding school people, being very strategic, clawing their way to the top of the ladder, numbing the pain every night with gin and tonic, and then getting up and rinse, repeat the next day to climb the ladder and step on anyone you can on the way up. So that was very much me. I was pretty good at it for a long time until, finally got fed up. I started a consultancy business to help small businesses to grow, to use some of my skills, and started to get a bit more heart-centered, a bit more compassionate. I was breaking down at this point emotionally. My strategic survival personality, as Nick Duffel calls it for ex-boarders, was starting to break, and it always does at some point, really. For most people, it'll be a divorce, it'll be a mental health or a physical health thing, it'll be a loss of a job, substance abuse, rock bottom. But at some point, you're going to go, God, I've been operating on these stories, on these, this sort of ego trip. And I started to fall apart. So I had a breakdown about 4 years ago. The healing work since has brought me to the work I do. But I got one thing really right in all of that carnage of booze and corporate climbing and getting very overweight and all sorts of stuff, was that I got married, had amazing children, and although my marriage didn't survive in the end, after I had a son, Ben, who very sadly died between 3 and 4 years old. So
sorry to hear that. That must have been horrendous.
Absolutely awful, devastating. And at the time, by that point I was brilliantly numb, and I was comfortably numb, in the words of Pink Floyd. So I sailed through, dissociated, got up, parenting my other twins. So I had twin girls whilst my son was dying, and then I threw myself into that and work and etc. And that set me up for a breakdown. In a few years to come, I was just burnt out. But my girls, are still with us, and I've done a lot of personal work to spend time with my son every day now. And here, which is beautiful. But that sort of brought me to the work now. It was really the breakdown that made me realise I had something to offer to the world, and that it wasn't worrying about my next promotion and trying to go on nice holidays and stuff like that.
It's really interesting, isn't it? The idea of a breakdown, I don't want to necessarily dwell on this too greatly, but there's something about that word, isn't there, that sort of, it seems to, like, it's what you do at the side of a road when there's smoke coming out of your engine, and then somebody comes along with an orange truck and tows you to safety. But like the human analogy, it's not quite the same, is it? Like what form that takes, and it's often. I don't know about often. I think I'm speaking outside of my comfort zone here, but in my limited experience of this, it's not a bad thing. Like it's something that really needs to happen. It's somehow like your true will, or like there's some part of you that is sort of like the weeds are growing through the concrete, and finally this edifice sort of shatters apart, and there's some more sort of authentic version of yourself comes to the fore. I don't want to polish it with too sort of like rainbow coloured a paintbrush, but what would you say about that?
Well, James, I think that's one of the most beautiful ways I've heard it put. That was lovely, the weeds going through the concrete. It's a breakthrough. It's a spiritual awakening. It's all of these things in my personal experience. But God, when you're going through it, some people don't make it out. And suicide rates amongst the groups that we support are very, very high, way higher than the national average, because some of them don't make it out. Some didn't make it out of school. They killed themselves at school, but or in the years since. But I'm very, very grateful that mine was a breakthrough, and I found the right coach. So I found a guy called Piers Cross, who's quite sort of big in the boarding school healing trauma world. He's created a film called Boarding on Insanity, which has been released recently, which is an incredible watch for seeing how the system works and what it sets people up for. I found him I don't know how still, it's the universe provides magic stuff, but he guided me through the last 4 years. A lot of, stuff I never thought I'd do, proper sort of chanting in woods and doing a lot of men's work, groups and a lot of emotional healing stuff. But the breakthrough bit, I definitely believe that when we're young, we come into this world a very shining 360 personality, with a lot of energy and a lot of beauty, and then the world takes chunks off us, and in the place of those chunks, it puts this veneer that you talked about, this sort of mask of how you should and shouldn't behave and speak and act, and to the point at which you get to whatever age it might be, and it has to break at some point, because it's nonsense and it's built on very, very shaky foundations. So I'm very pleased to have gone through my breakthrough, and now I don't have to waste the rest of my life.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And so let's talk about Seen and Heard. So what is this organization? how long have you been going? You sort of talked a little bit about the work that you do, but if you could just expand on that a bit, I'd be very keen to hear more about this.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, James. Appreciate it. But a year and a half ago, a bit more now, just under 2 years ago, I didn't look at my boarding school stuff. I didn't look at my early years stuff. I was in therapy for 20 years, talk therapy, and I didn't go anywhere near it because of the strategic survival side. Your ego often will keep you away from the boxes that really need opening, and the barriers, and and sort of language, the protectors and the defenders and all the people you've got up here keeping you on the straight and narrow, it would seem, won't let you go there. But ultimately, I finally got to the point at which I went, going away at 7 years old and not seeing your family very often, and being in that can't be a good thing, right? That did something to me. And so when I started to explore that, I ended up connecting with loads of others who had. And particularly a group of people from one of the Facebook groups, and that ended up being the founding directors of Seen and Heard. And we came at it from the view of, we've got to do something about this, because the myth of the privilege bit, we're not recognised for support services as a group, or everyone thinks we've got loads of money and we can just go and pay for it ourselves. But actually, there's so many people who came through the system who've either been too sick to work their entire life, or they had it and they lost it. They had the job, they had the house, they had whatever, and they just blew it up spectacularly. Self-sabotage, addiction, whatever. So there needs to be a place where these people can go for support, emotional health support, wellbeing support, that understands them and their experience and isn't going to judge them and call them posh. And even we went to funders around this and we heard, was it therapy for posh people? It's like, come on, you're supposed to be a kind of aware funding organisation. It's like, oh my God. So we're going to have to DIY this because no one cares. And we get why no one cares. There may be a bit of a chip on the shoulder, but it's starting to go. But we thought, well, we're going to have to set this up for people who've been through this system. And so we did 18 months ago, get it started. And we now do 3 things. So we do adult services, which is wellbeing support for adult ex-pupils and their families. That is free online sharing groups to be seen and heard in spaces where people can understand where they're coming from. It's specialist therapists, because we deal with a lot of abuse, people who've been abused in their institutions, and we deal with a lot of people with complex post-traumatic stress, neglect, abandonment, etc. So we've got specialists there. And we've got the funding support program for people on low and no incomes, because we've got a huge amount of people who cannot afford any help, self-help resources, etc. So we deliver that for adult services. And then the second thing that we do, which very much brings me into your world, is I thought, well, if we're going to look after the present pupils, the current pupils, we've got to get into the schools. And there are some boarding and independent schools who are doing a great job. Yeah. Not as many as who are doing a great job as in the state sector, particularly perhaps Wales, Scotland, other areas, around wellbeing and welfare and safeguarding. It's nowhere near good enough right now. It's better than it was. There's not the state-sanctioned, institution-sanctioned violence, abuse, neglect stuff that used to go on. It's warmer, it's fuzzier, it's cuddlier, but it's still burning teachers out, it's still burning kids out, and it's still not focusing on the whole child. The whole young person's learning experience and providing a supportive environment. So we work with schools, or the ones that will speak to us, which is not enough right now, but we're chipping away, of trying to implement progressive wellbeing and welfare programs for the schools, trauma-informed schools, emotion coaching, all the stuff that you talked about, working with the Welsh government around learning effectiveness and those sort of pillars of the body, mind, learning, how do people learn, self-regulation, etc. That's all the stuff that I'm trying to get into schools. That's the second part of what we do. And then the third part is we campaign for improved legislation for child sexual abuse. So we work with Survivors Trust, MSPCC and others. We sit on the Act on ICSA panel to try and get some change, particularly effective mandatory reporting of known or suspected child sexual abuse in regulated activities, so schools and institutions, But we've got a long way to go, although there is some little teeny sort of chinks of light now with the government starting to talk about implementing their 20 ICSA recommendations. So that's us in a nutshell.
Sorry, just to clarify, did you just say that there is not currently mandatory requirement to report child sexual abuse?
No.
I'm slightly reeling from that. That's not currently like a required thing. So if that happens and it is covered up, that's not a criminal offence. How does this play out? Can you help me to understand the practicalities around this?
Yeah, I mean, it's we're one of very few developed nations who don't have effective mandatory reporting in place. And although the government have said they will put mandatory reporting in, it's in train at the moment, as it was one of the 20 ICSA recommendations from a few years ago. However, what they're putting in is mandatory reporting light, which is if a child discloses abuse or you witness abuse and you're in a regulated profession, like you're a teacher or something like that, then you're now mandated to make a report to the local the LADO, the local authority designated officer, etc. But it doesn't carry a penalty if you don't, and there isn't the whistleblowing provisions and safeguarding in place for people who do blow the whistle on this sort of stuff. And most importantly, it doesn't include suspected abuse. So you as a teacher will have seen over the years and thought, this is not, something's going on here for this young person at home, something's going on in the school, this isn't right. Particularly within the boarding and independent school sector in the past, the reputation of the institution was put at the top of the list. Abusers were moved from school to school with a reference just to get them off people's plates. And mandatory reporting, effective mandatory reporting, is the only thing we can think of that says, no, if you know or suspect, you must report outside the institution, not inwards and upwards, where it will get blocked and the institution will be protected, but outwards to the right authorities, and action must be taken, or you risk a fine or a potential jail sentence if you do not report. But that isn't happening right now.
Wow, I am quite staggered by that. I just never assumed, I've never really thought about it, but you just assume that would be the case. Like, it's absolutely baffling that is not the case. Okay, so let's go back to education reform. What would you like to see? You're dead right. There's the whole thing about, like people are falling in the river, and at some point you need to go upriver and stop them from falling in, right? And so, what do you think needs to happen in education? And is that sort of in terms of, like, you talked a bit about some of the practices in schools, running wellbeing programs in schools and so on, but is there anything, like, do you think, for example, that boarding should be outlawed? Like, so we'd still have private schools, but you shouldn't be allowed to send a child away from their family of origin at the age of 7 years old. Like, what would you, what are your, do you have any sort of like hard asks, if you like, that you're working towards?
Yeah, thank you, James. Yeah, I mean, just to address the boarding one, obviously, we, as an organisation, we are trying to work within the current system to improve things. And if we're in the shut them all down camp, we can't get invited in, and we can't help to change things for young people. Ultimately, though, you will not find a developmental psychologist who thinks separating children from their families at an early age is a good idea. So I think we can hand on heart say that early years junior boarding is not good for children, except in the most extreme circumstances where they need to be removed from home for their own safety. Mm-hmm. And that's the same as in-state care. Yeah. So that's very much the case. So most people would probably agree with that. So boarding 11, 12 and under is well, as many think, in breach of European rights and harmful for children. When you get to the teens, that's where more people mainly soften up about it. I still believe, I've got 13 coming on 14-year-old girls. I know what they're bringing home from school every day with the stuff that they're having to go through with friendships and pressure of exams, work, and etc. I would not want my children going through that on their own in an institution. But bless you. For many, they may start to make decisions that actually home is not working out for them, and they start sort of drifting away. And boarding in late teens is not going to be as harmful as it is early years. Sixth form boarding, particularly for things like people who want to do sports or military or music or dance, whatever it might be, or specialisms and things, or special educational needs, there isn't really any evidence that says boarding after 16 is going to be harmful. Many children will be ready for a move on, pre-university, whatever. So that's sort of my position on that. But whilst boarding exists, I need to make sure that those young people are safe and healthy. And that's the other part, the big part of the work we're doing, which is what I want to see is a world where emotional education is as valued as, so EQ is as valued as IQ, if not more so. And it's really not. We live in a left brain, IQ dominant society, and the private sector is particularly, private schools and grammar schools, particularly sort of focused in this area. I mean, PSHE for me is a joke when I look at the PSHE curriculum and how it's being delivered and what's being delivered. And there, as you said, what point are young people taught how to human, as far as how their emotions work, the connection between mind and body, self-regulation of emotions, and how to interact with each other, how to be compassionate, etc. So these are the things that I believe have to come into our system, so that ultimately our education will get better, because stressed minds can't learn. Whereas at the moment, they're just beaten to death with facts, figures, numbers and exams, put into a sort of a freeze mode. And largely that's not going to suit many, many young people. And it's going to sort of bring our human capacity, if you like, for solving the climate crisis or, solving the issues in society. It's restricting that because it's keeping it too narrow. So I think for me, it starts with emotional education and valuing EQ and putting in place, you talked about breath work, meditation, mindfulness, communications and compassion. And we're actually at the moment working on a Compassionate Leaders of the Future program to create people who want to go out and change the world, who are in a heart-centered way. And we're running that for business leaders as well. So there's lots to be done, but ultimately I think a few simple changes to, it's not we do all this stuff as a school and then we do wellbeing, which is what it is at the moment. It's we're here for the well-being of the child and we do all this other stuff.
Yeah, got you. You should totally come to our event that we're running in Manchester in October. We're doing it as low cost. It's an unconference on Saturday the 11th. Do a little plug here. Saturday the 11th of October in Salford, at a secondary school called St Ambrose Cuthbert, and it's called Everybody Thriving, and creating a culture of well-being and love of learning in schools. And it's really about like where people are at now. There's this sort of like phrase that we've been using. We are the system. Like we are the system. The system is made of people and we're already in it. And there's loads that we can do. We don't need to wait for some well-being bill to go through Parliament as it is currently in order for us to do things now that will improve our well-being and those of the people around us. And so it's going to be a really interesting day, I think. But come along to that. And anyone listening, please feel free. It's really, really cheap to join us. And you can also join remotely if you're far away from Manchester. There's an amazing person from Brazil who's going to host an online element to that. So we're going to be bringing lots of voices together from around the world to have exactly that conversation that you were just describing about essentially making well-being our North Star instead of exam grades, right? So like, what would the exam system look like if we made the well-being of the people in it and also the people in the wider world happier and more regulated and what have you. So come along to that. And then so we should probably wrap up fairly soon. And it's 2025, and so no conversation is complete unless we've mentioned AI. And so, where does AI come into this for you?
Oh, thanks, James. And yeah, your event sounds fantastic. I'm definitely going to be there. AI for me, I because of all the emotional healing work and the standing in the woods barefoot and all this sort of stuff, I was very anti it for a long time. I thought, oh, technology, bring about our downfall, etc. I think I'd watched Terminator too many times as well, and thought sort of the system was going to come and kill us. But a great friend of mine who died about 18 months ago, very very sadly, was just the most beautiful man and the most incredible thinker in this area. He'd been with AI for years, and he said to me, not long before he died, that it was basically going to come here and save us. And I said, "Come on, man, that's quite something to say." But I've come to believe he's right, which is that our disconnection from the earth and from each other and from ourselves is because we've got way too far into a kind of a left brain analytical learning based world, and I believe AI is here to take the heavy lifting off on that and release us to do what we're supposed to do as humans, which is to connect, to feel, and to spend our time largely with each other, with our families, with our loved ones, and not at work or at school or in an institution, etc. I believe AI is going to help us do that, and I think it's going to help us solve the climate crisis. And I think it's going to be a part of our turning as a society, which I already see. It's been happening for 30, 40 years. It's moving in the right direction. It never moves fast enough. I get that. But if you stand back, go to a helicopter view, and you look at where we're going, I believe we're going in the right direction. And I think AI is part of it. So not only does it help me every day at work now, I believe it's part of the future for us as a human species. So yeah, thank you for asking.
Yeah, thank you for replying. I hope you're right. I'm not sure if I'm still quite agnostic on it. It's nice to hear. I think I read lots of doomster blogs, people who's the P doom, as it's so called, the probability of doom is high. I read lots of that stuff, and I think that there are. I really hope you're right, and I agree. It's sort of like there isn't really any middle ground. It's either going to be heaven or hell, and it's quite easy that you can anticipate just like an accidental hell, right? Just like an AI that just becomes all powerful and doesn't yield, and also the potential that they will become so smart that we won't even know what they're doing. Because they for us, I think our understanding of intelligence is limited by our human experience, and human experience is limited by the size of a cranium, right? Like you can't get smarter than a brain that will fit into a cranium. But if you've got a computer the size of the gigafactory or whatever, and it becomes artificial, and it develops AGI, and it can then create other versions of itself, and there's a community of these things that are communicating with each other. There's no reason to believe that they will be as smart compared to us as we are to a cat, and cats have got no clue what we're up to. and likewise, they might not even be communicating in a language that we understand or can even discern, that we can either see or hear. They might be communicating through whatever, some other part of the electromagnetic spectrum that we can't see or hear without some sort of instruments and what have you. It could be encrypted. There's just, I think that there are all kinds of ways in which this could go really badly wrong. But I think that also the early signs are pretty positive. Like you said, you're using it every day. I use it all the time as a tool for I find it really helpful for engaging in dialogue. Just to be in a state of dialogue with something is so helpful for getting my own sort of creative juices flowing. And I think there's definitely a sense of a concern of things being a bit too much outsourced to them. I've started to see like videos on YouTube that have just so obviously been written by an AI, posted by an AI, voiced by an AI, and it's really shallow, and it's just like it looks like it's going to solve the problem that you face, but then you click on it and it's just crap. And I'm concerned that the world is just going to fill rapidly with AI generated, like low quality stuff. That's going to make it hard to find the signal amongst the noise, But I hope you're right. I hope you're right. And it's unbelievable. It's an unbelievably powerful tool, isn't it? Set of tools. Yeah,
I hear you on all of those concerns. I hear you. It's absolutely the case. In our areas that we share, the shared interest of education. I think for me, ultimately, if we can free up space within the curriculum, if you want to call it that, for well-being, which at the moment it can't get any airtime. If AI can help, whether it's teachers marking, whether it's lesson planning, whether it's how students deliver their work, anything that allows us to get back to some humaning is welcome. And I think there will be some natural ebb and flow with, how much or how little it's doing for us and where it's going too far, etc. There's always that with anything new, as you know. There's a push and there's a pull and then there's a settling in the right place. So but it's fascinating.
Yeah, definitely. It sure is. Well, Chris, thank you very much. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation. And I hope it's the beginning of many, many more like it. And it seems that our values and ideas are very, very strongly aligned. And you say you're going to come to Manchester in October.
Yeah, I'd had it sent to me already. And the
awesome.
only problem with it is it's a Saturday and my children. So I'm going to find a way to try and make it happen. But
we are. How old are your kids?
Nearly 14.
Oh, that's old enough. We really want kids to come to this thing. We really want, so that like I said about the EPA, the Education Policy Alliance, our DNA is that we are comprised. And so we've got quotas on Eventbrite. There's quotas. And so it's already full for I nearly said artificial educators then. For alternative educators, that quota is almost full. But we want more young people to come and to contribute to this conversation. And so feel free to bring them along if you wish.
Yeah, cool. Well, thank you for the invite. And as we wrap up, just want to let everyone know that the resources from today, the links and things for Dr. James Mannion's work will be in the show notes. And I'm sure they will be when James shares it on his podcast as well. And the Seen and Heard resources will be in there too. So whether it be the event, whether it be the books, Making Change Stick, or information around the programs that James is running and Seen and Heard are running as well. So should we call it a day there, James?
Let's call it a day. Thank you very much, Chris. May your work continue and flourish, and all power to your elbow. It sounds like you're doing very important, worthwhile stuff.
Thank you, and to you the same. And I feel very grateful that young people in Wales will be starting to see your work running through, from very, very soon, and that's incredible. So yeah, thank you for your time today. Really appreciate it, and thank you so much to everybody who's been listening or watching. It's been a great podcast, great opportunity, and I hope you've enjoyed it. So thank you very much, and take care.
How it is and how it should be, are wrestling in the streets again. One's got the other by its expectations. The other is going for a submission. Hope has stoicism by the neck. Acceptance is struggling for breath. 'Cause driving has it on the ropes, but what I want is being choked. My wheels being dragged through a hedge backwards. May the thought